What would happen if you could hear the dead? And what if, in trying to help, you opened a door to something even darker? Get ready, because what's coming isn't just a horror story. It's a choice between life and death, with unimaginable consequences. If you want to know what happens when the veil between the worlds is torn, stay tuned. Every like, every subscription is crucial to keep this channel alive. Don't let this story go unnoticed. Come to the dark side and discover what the dead have to say. Lúcia grew up in a pretty unusual environment for a kid. Her family's morgue. To her, the bodies weren't something to be scared of, but rather a source of mystery. While other kids played outside, she sat next to the dead, listening to their stories. Death, to her, wasn't an end, but a phase that could be understood, almost like having a conversation with a distant friend. There, among the smells and echoes of a cold room, Lúcia learned more about the cycle of life than any school could teach her. It's funny to think that, while many people view death as a taboo, for Lúcia, it's always been a familiar presence. When she was little, she used to wonder what it would be like to talk to those who had passed. That's how she discovered her gift. She could hear the whispers of the dead, as if they were just waiting for someone to give them a voice. It wasn't something scary to her. On the contrary, it felt almost comforting, like each spirit was a piece of a bigger puzzle. Now, imagine a child growing up in that setting. Usually, kids are afraid of the unknown, right? But not Lúcia. She grew up as if death were her friend, a distant figure, but always near. Of course, her parents, experienced pathologists, kept a close eye on her sharp perception. But at the same time, they couldn't deny that Lúcia's gift could be a huge asset to the family morgue. Still, contrary to what many might think, that didn't make her normal. The truth is, no matter how comfortable she was with the dead, her childhood was never really normal. Over time, Lúcia began to realize that the dead weren't just lost spirits. They were like old friends, patiently waiting to share their stories, feelings, and even their regrets. She felt that, in some way, the spirits were protecting her, as if there were a silent bond between them. While others were afraid to enter the autopsy room, she would step in without fear, knowing that the dead there were somehow on her side, watching over her. This protection seemed to go beyond simple empathy. Lúcia could feel some kind of invisible shield around her whenever she was near the bodies. There was something comforting in the presence of the spirits, as if each one in their final journey had decided, somehow, that they would look after her. It was as if that place, with all its coldness and shadows, was a safe haven where nothing could hurt her. Her parents, the pathologists, never fully understood how this worked. But one thing was certain. Something was happening there, something that went beyond what they could explain. Of course, other people couldn't see what she saw. To her co-workers and even to distant relatives, Lúcia was just an odd child, maybe a little eccentric. But deep down, she knew she had something that connected her to these spirits in a unique way. They weren't just there to talk or tell tragic stories. Somehow, they were protecting her, making sure nothing bad would happen, as if their presence was a quiet warning that in the morgue, she was at home. And at home, she was safe. As Lúcia grew, her parents started involving her more actively in the morgue's work. By the age of 12, she was already helping prepare bodies, organizing tools, and even recording cases with impressive accuracy for her age. Without realizing it, she was becoming a true apprentice in the dark world of death. While other teenagers were into sports or parties, she was diving deep into the mysteries of the human body, listening more and more to the whispers of the dead passing through. But this process wasn't just technical. Lúcia felt that with each passing day, her power was growing stronger. When she did simple tasks like changing the sheets or organizing the room, she noticed the dead becoming more present. The spirits that once whispered subtly now seemed to communicate more clearly. Some asked for help, others just wanted to be heard. For her, there were no more boundaries, Her connection to the beyond was stronger than ever, as if the dead were no longer just a distant echo, but an active part of her life. This training, however, wasn't just about mastering techniques. Lúcia began to realize that there was something bigger at play. It wasn't just about learning how to care for the dead. Slowly, she was being prepared for something greater, something her parents hadn't even imagined. Her ability to hear the dead wasn't just being shaped for daily tasks. It was actually becoming an essential skill for what was to come. The morgue, which once seemed like a regular place, was starting to reveal its deepest secrets to Lúcia. And unknowingly, she was getting closer to discovering something beyond anything she could have ever imagined. It was a night like any other when the mysterious body arrived at the morgue. At first, it seemed like just another victim of some random accident, nothing too out of the ordinary. But as Lúcia performed the autopsy, she realized something was completely off. The body, though physically intact, gave off a strange feeling, as if it carried something beyond the obvious. The energy in the room shifted, like the air had thickened, and the whispers she usually heard from other spirits were more intense, more urgent. Lúcia approached cautiously, feeling the growing pressure around her. She touched the body with the tips of her fingers, and immediately, a wave of cold ran down her spine. The spirit manifesting there wasn't like the others. It seemed to refuse to leave. Its presence was so strong that it was almost physical. It communicated with Lúcia in a strange and unsettling way, transmitting images and feelings of agony. Something much deeper and more disturbing than any spirit had ever shared with her before. This wasn't just a lost soul. It was someone with a clear and urgent purpose. The feeling Lúcia had was that somehow, the body was trying to warn her about something big and dark that was approaching. At first, she tried to brush it off, thinking maybe she was just overreacting. But the spirits around her were restless, as if they recognized the presence of this being in a way she couldn't fully understand. Something was happening in the morgue, and Lúcia knew that this body wasn't just the result of a random accident. Whatever had happened to it, it was about to change everything. In the days following the arrival of the mysterious body, Lúcia began to notice a disturbing change. The spirits that had once communicated with her calmly now started showing signs of desperation. No more melancholic stories or quiet regrets. Now the dead seemed to scream in silence, their presences frantic and hurried, as if they were running from something. Lúcia felt a growing tension in the air, like the morgue was being invaded by some dark force, something that was making the dead lose their natural balance between the worlds. The sense of agony was tangible. Lúcia had grown used to spirits seeking comfort or a kind word, but now she couldn't find the peace they were looking for. They were restless, caught between desperation and anger, as if they were being forced into something they couldn't understand. She heard their cries for help, but also felt an overwhelming wave of terror coming from every direction, as if something was about to break down the barriers between the living and the dead. It was a pressure that grew stronger with every passing hour, and Lúcia didn't know how to respond. For Lúcia, the voices of the dead were getting louder and more intense, almost deafening. She tried to focus, but it felt like the manifestations were becoming more frantic, out of control. The images the spirits were transmitting to her were growing more chaotic and distorted, as if they were trying to show her something, but in a way she couldn't fully grasp. She knew something was about to happen. Something big. Whatever it was about to invade the morgue and shatter the fragile balance between the worlds. And Lúcia, unknowingly, was right at the center of it all. As the spirits grew more restless and the tension in the morgue intensified, Lúcia felt the urgent need to understand what was happening. She knew something was beyond her grasp, something her parents, despite all their experience, had never mentioned. One night, during a quiet vigil, with the morgue still and silent, she dug through the family's old files, poring over notes and records from the past. It was there, in a dusty old folder, that she found what she was searching for: the ancient pact her family had made generations ago. The pact, written in a nearly forgotten language, described a dark agreement between Lucia's ancestors and a supernatural force, something that transcended death itself. This pact, made in ancient times, promised prosperity and safety for the morgue, but in exchange, the souls passing through the place had to remain trapped, caught between the worlds. Lucia was stunned as she realized that, over the years, her ability to communicate with the dead wasn't just a simple gift. It was a direct result of this pact. It was a link between the living and the dead, one that had to be maintained at all costs. What she didn't know, however, was that the pact was starting to weaken. As she read, Lucia felt a chill run down her spine. Each word seemed to tighten the pressure in her chest. She now understood the reason for the restless spirits and the growing desperation. The pact was failing. The souls, once at peace, were trying to escape, trying to cross into the world of the living. And the worst part was that, with the weakening of the pact, the spirits weren't just asking for help anymore. They were demanding freedom. Lucia knew she was the key to understanding what was happening, but she also realized that breaking the pact could have unimaginable consequences. The morgue was on the verge of collapse, and she, the only one with the power to intervene, was facing a deep dilemma about what to do next. After weeks of mounting tension, the presence of the ancient spirit became unmistakably clear. Lucia was in the morgue when she first felt it, undeniably. It was as if the air had thickened, become heavier, and as she looked at the autopsy table where the mysterious body had been placed, she saw a shadow move. The spirit manifesting there was unlike any other. It didn't speak with the soft whispers of lost or regretful souls. Its presence was commanding, powerful. It didn't come to be heard, but to be felt, to fill the space around it. Lucia tried to communicate with it, as she had with the others, but it was futile. The spirit didn't seem interested in kind words or advice. It imposed itself, showing her images of its own death and of an ancient time when the pact had been sealed. The ancient spirit was more than just trapped. It was furious, desperate for release. It wanted to break the cycle, shatter the chains that kept it imprisoned between the worlds. And it didn't want to wait any longer. With every manifestation, Lucia felt a wave of cold flood the morgue, as if it was taking from her not just control, but her very sense of safety. What Lucia didn't know was that this spirit wasn't just trying to escape. It possessed an ancient power, one that could influence not only the dead, but also the living. It wanted Lucia to make a choice that could destroy the pact, but also bring chaos to the world of the living. The spirit was preparing to cross into the living world, and in doing so, it would bring all the others who were trapped with it. The morgue, once a place of quiet transition, was now becoming the epicenter of a supernatural battle. And Lucia, more than ever, found herself at the heart of the storm. Time was running out. Lucia knew that to resolve the crisis unfolding in the morgue, she would have to confront not only the ancient spirit, but also the dark secrets of her family's past. As she dug deeper into the old records, she uncovered something that left her speechless. The pact made by her ancestors wasn't just a bargain with forces beyond understanding. It had deeper roots, connecting her bloodline to an ancient lineage of necromancers. Lucia's family, like a few others in the world, hadn't just dealt with the dead. They had controlled, both directly and indirectly, the flow between the two worlds across generations. This revelation was a shock. Not only her parents, but her entire bloodline had, in some way, been corrupted by the power of the pact. The abilities Lucia had believed were a natural gift were, in fact, the price her family had paid for centuries of deals with supernatural entities. Over time, this power had transformed into a curse. The reason the spirits were so desperate wasn't just because the pact was failing. It was because they were aware that, for generations, they had been manipulated and used as bargaining chips. They were no longer willing to accept the dominance of her bloodline over the living and the dead. Faced with this revelation, Lúcia was overwhelmed with deep anguish. She, who had always believed she was doing the right thing, who had always thought her ability was a blessing, now found herself caught in the middle of a vicious and corrupt cycle. For her, it was no longer just about saving the dead or keeping the morgue running. Now, the very essence of her existence was at stake. She would have to choose between following the legacy of her family, continuing as the guardian of the dead, or facing the past and breaking the pact, knowing that doing so could open a door to unpredictable consequences. The confrontation with her own legacy was just beginning. Lúcia knew that time was running out. The ancient spirit grew stronger with each passing day, and the tension in the morgue was mounting. The whispers of the dead, once unsettling, now became threatening, almost like a growing pressure that was about to tear through the fragile line between the worlds. She felt that if she made the wrong choice, not only would the morgue be destroyed, but the barrier separating the living from the dead would collapse once and for all. She no longer had the luxury of time, and with that, the weight of responsibility pressed down on her with devastating force. The choice was clear, but impossible to make without consequences. She could honor the pact, allowing the cycle to continue, sacrificing the spirit's freedom in exchange for maintaining the order between the worlds. Or she could break it, freeing the spirits, but risking an irreversible chaos that would spill over into the world of the living. The sense of helplessness was overwhelming, but as she looked around at the spirits surrounding her, Lúcia knew she had to act. Each soul she saw was a reminder that her decision would affect not just the morgue, but everyone connected to it, living or dead. In that moment, she made her choice. Lúcia decided to break the pact. It was a painful decision because she knew that by doing so, she would lose control over the dead forever. But as she looked into the desperate eyes of the spirits, she felt that she had to give them a chance to rest, to move on. No matter how much chaos might arise, she could no longer allow her family and herself to remain complicit in a curse. She stood up, resolute, knowing that by breaking the pact, the world would never be the same again. When Lúcia made the decision to break the pact, something began to shift immediately. The morgue seemed to vibrate with a new energy, as if the air itself was being purified. At first, the spirits fell silent, as though they knew what was about to happen. Then, a wave of cold light filled the room, and in a moment Lúcia would never forget, the souls began to manifest in great numbers. They were no longer trapped in an endless cycle of suffering. They were being freed, finally, after centuries of captivity. It was a powerful moment, but also terrifying. For every spirit that departed, a part of Lúcia seemed to break apart. The sensation was almost indescribable. She saw the faces of the dead she had known throughout her life, and with a simple gesture, they all silently bid her farewell, as if thanking her for her courage. Lúcia wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew she was doing the right thing. When the last spirit left, the pressure in her chest lifted, and the autopsy room, once weighed down with a nearly tangible heaviness, transformed into a place of tranquility. The morgue had been purified, but Lúcia felt that a new cycle was about to begin, not just in the morgue, but in the world of the living as well. She had freed the spirits, but now the price of that liberation was starting to show itself. The line between the worlds had weakened, and the consequences of her decision were yet to unfold. What would happen when the dead were no longer the guardians of a space between the worlds? Would they be able to find peace, or would death become even more chaotic? Lúcia knew that by releasing the spirits, she had opened a door. But what she didn't know was that this door could allow something even darker to enter the world of the living. After the spirits were freed, Lúcia quickly realized that the consequences of her actions were far more complex than she had imagined. In the days that followed, the world around her began to change. The boundary between the living and the dead, once so clearly defined, now seemed to blur. Strange phenomena started to occur. shadows moving without explanation, whispers in empty places, and a constant feeling of being watched, as if something or someone was observing her. The dead, now free, were not at peace. They had left the morgue, but something was preventing them from finding rest, and those in the world of the living began to feel their presence in increasingly tangible ways. The chaos began to spread like a wave. At first, it was small disturbances, objects moving on their own, strange nightmares afflicting those who passed near the morgue. But it didn't take long before things escalated into something much more dangerous. Lives began to be disrupted in inexplicable ways. People vanished without a trace, while others seemed to lose their sanity, as if taken over by voices that didn't belong to them. Lúcia felt that by breaking the pact, she hadn't just freed the spirits. She had opened a breach for forces beyond human control, forces that were now invading the physical world. At first, Lúcia tried to control the situation, but it quickly became clear that nothing was under her control anymore. The energy she had unleashed spread like a virus, infecting everything around her. The dead were no longer confined to the morgue. They roamed the world of the living, seeking something Lúcia couldn't understand. She realized that the true price of her action wasn't just the immediate chaos. It was the fact that, by breaking the pact, she hadn't only released the spirits, but also death itself, now walking among the living in a more tangible and terrifying way than she could have ever imagined. As the chaos unfolded around her, Lúcia faced a harsh reality. She had freed the dead, but now death was more present than ever. The boundary between the living and the dead had been shattered, and with it, the consequences seemed endless. However, something else was starting to take shape in the darkness. Lúcia felt that, despite the suffering and disorder, something new was emerging. The transition hadn't been a simple break. It was a transformation, a reconfiguration of the very concepts of life and death. The morgue, now empty of spirits, seemed to be becoming something else. Lúcia still didn't know if she had made the right choice, but she knew that she had altered the course of history. This was not just the end of a cycle, but the beginning of something greater, something she couldn't fully understand. The door she had opened wasn't just connecting the worlds in a disordered way. It was creating a new balance, albeit an unstable one. The forces she had released were still in motion, and what would emerge from this opening was still uncertain. The only thing she knew for sure was that her family's cycle was over, and now she would have to face the consequences of it. Lúcia looked at the fragile line between the worlds, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The future was uncertain, but something inside her told her that she had a much larger role to play. Death, now so close, had ceased to be just a transition. She was standing at the threshold of a new era, one where the rules could be rewritten, where the line between the end and the beginning had blurred. And with a deep breath, Lúcia braced herself for whatever came next, knowing that her decision had opened not just a portal, but an entirely new reality. So what would you do in Lúcia's place? Releasing the spirits might have seemed like the right choice, but the consequences are unimaginable. Every comment, like, and subscription helps this channel continue bringing stories like this one to you. If you're scared, but also have that urge to know more, don't miss the next video. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you won't miss what's coming next.